There's a lot of talk about unfair advantages when it comes to gains. You know the responses. You got a buddy that hits a monumental deadlift PR, it's got to be his freakish deadlift leverages. Then there's a guy you follow on Instagram because his bony White Walker build made you feel better about your trash physique, but seemingly overnight, he's developed a bulging mountain of etched marble. It's got to be that there cell tech. Even if you were the underdog, the shit athlete in high school who fell in love with this field and just dedicated years to grinding and chipping away at small victories until you amass something that looked like a competitive package. Even if you can really attribute all of your success to pure discipline and hard work, somebody's gonna comment to the effect of, if I had a two-parent household full of standards and life lessons, I'd also be a cheater. But imagine for a second a world where none of these unfair advantages exist. Imagine that environmental factors are washed away and steroids have never been invented. There is still going to be one thing that separates the gainful from the gainsless. And that thing is obviously a seatbelt. Take the stability pill or forever stay small. Obviously that's a joke. No, the thing that separates people, all other things being equal, is genetics. Genetics are hugely important, and we're going to illustrate just how important they are. But in understanding genetics, you're also going to understand how they don't explain everything. And by the end of this, you are going to realize that the appeal to bad genetics is really just a cope.
Do you like
free hoodies?
Yeah.
Barbell Apparel's giving away free hoodies.
How do you like them?
Free hoodies. Barbell Apparel's free hoodie sale is going on right now. Every $99 gets you a free hoodie, and it stacks. So go get some Bromley merch, get some comfy jeans, and knock out your holiday shopping while you're at it. This deal will end soon, so go now. There are 20,000 protein coding genes that directly determine everything in your body, from how your bones are put together, to where your tendons insert, to how fast you're going to recover, and how slowly you're going to grow. Dmitry Klokov was anecdotally said to have had caveman-like proportions. He had a very pronounced brow and strong jawline, but he was also said to have had fingers that were twice as thick as a normal person's fingers. Now, this type of build, just having bones that are a bit bigger, joints that are a bit thicker, adds a 10x multiplier to durability, meaning you can train like a madman. He was said to have snatched 440 pounds within an hour of having woken up. Guys, I got a foam roll for 45 minutes before I walk up a flight of stairs. Take the ACTN3, often called the sprint gene. This gene is tied directly to fast twitch muscle fibers, what you need for explosive power and speed. And if you have the R allele, especially the RR genotype, you're more likely to find yourself in the ranks of elite power athletes. One study of 301 athletes found that the sprint group had a disproportionate representation of this gene compared to the endurance group. In addition to that, it also coincides with a protective mechanism. People experience lower muscle damage from certain types of training. So we're not just talking about a particular predisposition to a trait, we're also talking about how training affects your body, and this is going to influence what protocols you can get away with, how much of it you can do, what type of training you need to do. Then there's the ACE gene, which helps control how efficiently your body delivers oxygen during exercise. The II genotype is more common in endurance athletes because it supports long distance performance and efficient energy use by virtue of the blood vessels being dilated. Then there's the MSTN gene, which produces myostatin, and it's a protein that acts as a natural limiter on muscle growth. When it's doing its job, there's a hard cap on how much muscle you're going to build. But in circumstances where the gene is knocked out completely, either in a laboratory or in freak instances in nature, you get things like double-muscled cattle. Now, if we wash away the oppressive inequity of environmental differences and steroid use, we can imagine a utopia where everyone, given the same opportunity to train, more or less achieves the same results, right? Because that's how people work. Fucking of course it's not. As the saying goes, when environmental pressures are low, genetic pressures are high. What that means is that when the environment is the same for everybody, the individual differences in genetics are actually expressed louder and louder. If you imagine this world where steroids never existed, and then imagine that everybody's incentivized to get jacked, it's just a thing that everybody does, you're still going to have a distribution curve that the people fall along. The left end of the bell curve is going to be the truly disadvantaged. It's going to be people with small frames, poor leverages, shallow tendon insertions. They're going to respond to training slowly, they're probably going to have a hard time recovering, and they might even have some muscle wasting or brittle bone disease. Now, they can still improve their lot in life with training, but they're not going to be climbing up the ladder into the competitive ranks very easily. Now, in the middle of the bell curve is going to be where most people reside, and that includes you. These are people who can grow muscle just fine and diet down just fine. But as is the norm with most people, efforts are hit and miss, inconsistencies abound, and you are probably in desperate need of a Gordon Ramsay or John Tafferty style intervention to save your trash training.
And you don't have a f***ing clue what you're doing, and you're watching
catching them.
These people almost always have some advantage that they take for granted, which they rate their other qualities against. Like if you take the guy that loves deadlifting because he got pretty good at it pretty fast, you might be thinking of somebody who has a less developed, more lanky upper body, somebody who identifies as a poor bencher. And this false sense that the other qualities are bad becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have the permanent cutter who's always focused on keeping the waistline down and they lament their inability to get big. Then you have the kind of big average soft gainer who's always a 12-week diet away from turning heads at the beach, but that day will never come. So the question here is, the people in the middle of the bell curve, do they have upward mobility? Can they take on more competitive waters? Or are they correct in dismissing their lack of success as a byproduct of mediocre genetics? As you look to the right side of the bell curve, you start to see what these freak genetic combinations look like, who are inevitably going to be destined to the top spot. As somebody's natural state leans to being more muscular and having less body fat with less effort, you get more freakish types, all the way to the sought after 1 in a billion Bane build. And yes, being pretty damn muscular with low body fat can absolutely happen without drugs. It's just going to be achievable by a smaller chunk of the population. We have to understand that genetics are really important, but it's essential you understand exactly how they're important. Olympic lifting provides some of the best insight we have because it's been around for a very long time. It goes on in every country and it's very standardized, meaning people go in and for many years they follow very rigid training protocols with very high stakes and lots of pressure, and that eliminates a lot of the noise of your typical Western recreational dick around lifting culture. Now what we observe is each one of these nations having their own system that recruits talent, usually from a very young age based on what they think is going to make a good lifter, and then they direct them to their specific school of training. Now, depending on the nation, these schools can range from a university type setting where you learn everything there is to learn and you go on to become a coach after the fact. It's very academic. Some of them run like finely oiled machines. Some of them are basically focused play, and some of them are outright meat grinders. Now, what we find over the history of Olympic weightlifting is a spread of gold medals and world records from every nation and every training system. They do not tend to converge on any one particular method. Now, to show the degree to which systems do not converge, so you can't put it all in training program, the West has largely romanticized the role of Soviet-style periodization in producing champions. The Soviets ran roughshod at the Olympics, specifically in Olympic weightlifting, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. The biggest asset to the Soviet Union was, in fact, the amount of people that they could throw into their machine. Through the 80s, comparing the USSR to a small country like Bulgaria, the USSR had 265 million people to Bulgaria's 9 million. By that time, they had 39 gold medals in Olympic weightlifting to Bulgaria's 5. They had a GDP of $1.2 trillion to Bulgaria's $0.04 trillion. And they had 340,000 registered Olympic weightlifters to Bulgaria's 5,000. In the 1985 World Weightlifting Championships, Bulgaria in short order handed the Soviet Union's ass to them by beating them in the total medal count and the gold medal count. Their methodologies could not have been more diametrically opposed. Now, you might be thoroughly black-pilled at this point, but we're going to fix that because while genetics do matter to determine who's going to be the absolute best of the best out of any group of people, they don't matter quite the way you think they do. And they are especially not the limiting factor keeping the average person from achieving the basic amount of strength and muscularity that they want. The first reason that genes don't matter the way you think is because there are just too many genes to count, too many combinations of genes to count, and we just don't have a very good handle on it. In addition to that, you have no idea what your genetic profile is or how it compares to people that you deem hyper responders. Remember, there are 20,000 protein coding genes with variations and mutations. We've gotten really comfortable with the catch-all of gains, a very broad description of things that might happen if you go to the gym. But when we're talking about genes, we're talking about specific outcomes, not just muscle growth versus strength, but very specific mechanisms that concern exactly how our cells form, exactly how we respond to different stimulus, and on and on. So if we're going to be specific, we're quickly going to find that we don't exactly know what good genes means. Imagine for a second you want to be a Mr. Olympia contender, or maybe just have a killer physique. We'll compare a Frank Zane to a Nick Walker. Nobody would deny either of these people are quote-unquote genetically gifted, but to look at Nick, who has a just complete mutant build, 24-inch arms on a 5'7" frame, and somehow his waist isn't like swelling out past his lats, to compare that to Frank Zane, who had a very average build, 5'9", you're talking about a guy that legitimately legitimately had about 175 pounds of lean mass, winning the biggest bodybuilding show in the world, and this was in the era of Arnold. You have no idea what specific combination of genes allowed Frank to look the way he did, and if that's actually attainable. 5'9" and 175 pounds of lean mass isn't exactly freakish proportions. The truth is, aesthetics are like the easiest thing in the world because literally everybody can get lean, and people with less mass than a golden retriever get mistaken for jacked all the time simply because their body fat's low. Now, if we want to look at strength, there are just as many variables at play. You can look at John Hack, who benched 600 and deadlifted well over 900 to powerlifting standards while having a pretty standard 80s action star build. Like, he's muscular by anybody's account, but he's not like turning heads on Instagram simply because of how jacked he is. But the thing is, John's numbers typically come from grotesque bloated perma-bulkers. His talents are completely different than that of Thor, who for all we know could be completely disadvantaged in some ways, but it doesn't matter because like Shetland ponies don't lift as much as full-grown buffaloes. And we also have to understand that for the genes that we have studied, they still are not the singular factor predicting success. They're more proportionately found in groups of elite athletes, but not always found, and that means that the importance of any one particular advantage isn't as important as you might think. Guys, if you want to hit the holy trifecta of gains, the size, the strength, and of course the clout, you need a program that checks the biggest boxes. Not only does it use the best time-tested movements that you are actually likely to stick to and improve on, but it includes a logical progression that is based on my most popular programs. These are programs that have gotten rave reviews from people that literally just ran the template. BaseStrengthLP uses 3 of the most proven templates pulled from the principles of some of the biggest, strongest men in history that have been used for over a century. The workouts are fun, intuitive, there's a logical progression, but it does take it up a notch because it personalizes the workouts to you. As you get bigger, stronger, more advanced, it becomes harder to tick those numbers forward, and you can't get by not adjusting your workouts to your own particular tolerances. Now, most people get an online coach to take care of that for them to the tune of $200 to $300 a month, and the rest of the people just never figure it out to begin with. So if you're wondering why you start every training cycle super excited only to get several weeks in, feel brittle, overtrained, tired, disillusioned, like you're just a dodgeball and the program is the side of a building, then you need direction that updates your training minute to minute, day to day, week to week based on your immediate feedback. BaseStrengthLP takes the guesswork out of training, and it does what only an online coach can do, which is personalize the program to you at 1/10 of the cost. Yes, 1/10 of the cost. So jump on the heart and soul of old school training. It's my programming, but it is your program, and you cannot get that anywhere else. Hit up BaseStrength.com today to get started on your gains. The next reason genes don't matter the way you think they do is because they represent trade-offs more so than good genes or bad genes. I covered some of this in my video, Gym Nerfs that are actually buffs. Wherever you are missing some supposedly overpowered gene, and you might think, oh, woe is me, what's the point? There is some trade-off that you're benefiting from that you just haven't taken the time to take accounting of. We talked about the ACTN3, the sprint gene, and while it positively affects fast switch fibers for power output and lessens muscle damage, it also makes you less flexible. Then also consider that along with the I allele of the ACE gene isn't as great for endurance activities. Then you might wonder who this combination is better suited for. Maybe you do see them a lot in weightlifters and throwers and track athletes, but would this be an essential piece of genetic material for gymnasts and calisthenic athletes, for rugby or football players? It's hard to say. And I also like talking about the MSTN gene because everybody's fixated on this. That's going to be like the first thing they hack with CRISPR, is trying to figure out how to knock out myostatin in people to just get them to layer on muscle like crazy. People might think that this is like a superhero type gene. It's actually not quite right because the effect comes from having both alleles, which is just extremely rare in human beings. There's only a couple of case studies out there. And while there are some people that might have one allele and it technically gives a benefit, the muscle building advantage is pretty sparse. And it's also been shown that the mice and cattle that have this mutation are actually proportionately weaker than their normally coded counterpart. Again, obvious advantages are not always advantages. Now, the third reason that genes do not matter the way you think is because of the tortoise and hare dynamic. We think of the genetically talented being the meteoric risers, the people that start young, grow very, very fast, and then they're world champions by the time they're 19. But when you look at a group of elite athletes standing on a podium at a world stage, how do you know that they all had that specific package? How do you know that you're not looking at somebody who might have been disadvantaged from those people, but went about solving problems and finding ways to clock more work in a way that most of their competitors didn't? The fact is, you don't know that. It's an assumption we make, and it's not a very strong one. Let's compare and contrast two graphs. This is Ed Cohen, one of the greatest of all time of powerlifting. I am a big fan of his approach. He's very methodical, very calculated, but Ed got his numbers to where they were pretty quickly, in pretty short order. Notice that he hit this growth, but what's impressive is that he sustained his performance for so many years. But what about this guy, Zydrunas? Many still consider the GOAT of strongman. He must have been a total fast gainer too, right? Zydrunas just showed up within a couple years, started kicking ass and taking names. But actually, Zydrunas' arc up to the top is the exact opposite of Ed Cohen's. In 97, Zydrunas had a powerlifting deadlift of 727. That was single ply without straps, but I promise you, Zydrunas in 97, competing in World's Strongest Man, was not limited by grip here. It took him a couple of years to get up to around the 800 mark, then some more years to get into the mid 8s. It was a steady incremental climb that culminated with his heaviest pull of all time from the floor, done without a suit, in World's Strongest Man 2011, a 970 pound, roughly, deadlift from the floor. Then look towards his log press. In 2004, Z could log press a bit over 400 pounds. Impressive, of course, but there are middleweight strongmen that can do this right now. It took many years of slow incremental grinding, 10 and 20 pounds at a time, to get Zydrunas' log press to his epic 502 that he did in 2015. We think of Z as the great because he had so many dominant victories throughout this era, but strongman started small and he was competing against a worse talent pool than today. If Zydrunas started in 2025, his numbers would be good for a national level pro, but he would not be on the world stage. And how tragic would it be if he realized the rate of progress was too slow and then never reached his full potential because he got discouraged by the faster responders around him? One of the lessons of the USSR was in regards to what the average person was capable of. Medvedev hypothesized that a highly structured system could take more normal people to international levels. So while they had over 300,000 weightlifters in the 80s, and that would allow them to find the most talented to take gold medals at the Olympics, it also meant that they would have a bigger reservoir of athletes to compete at a much higher level. Now, what did they find the average time was for these lifters to realize their full God-given potential? 9 to 11 years. That's not a decade of doing whatever at Planet Fitness. That's not a decade of program hopping or jumping on the newest fitness fad. That's a decade of working as a professional lifter directly under coaches, living, getting paid as an athlete. Now, I want you to think about that when you hear people talk about how long it takes for a normal average lifter to reach their natural limit. What environmental factors have you controlled for and have you moved in your favor, and how long have you been training in that environment? The truth that many of you don't want to admit is you have much more genetic potential than you think. It's just going to take a lot of years of working harder than you want to realize it. Research by Duckworth et al. In 2007 looked across 6 studies measuring grit. They looked at West Point cadets, they looked at spelling bee contestants, and they compared grit scores to outcomes like GPA, completion rates, and competition rankings. What they found was that grit predicted long-term success better than IQ, better than SAT scores, better than talent rankings. Grit determines your tolerance to obstacles and failures. If you're in a race on a rough track and every vehicle has a 20% chance of a wheel falling off every time they hit a pothole, no one is finishing the race no matter how souped up their engines are. But if you found a way to take your sad, pathetic little box car and lower that rate of catastrophic failure down to like 1%, you're going to be the favorite to win. This is part of the paradox of talent. People who start out gifted often don't take it as seriously because it didn't come at a personal cost, so it doesn't have value to them. And that means that when they do face some obstacle, when they do get beat, their pride gets hurt, they're more likely to take their ball and go home and say, I can do something else. So let's say you are in fact a slow gainer and you're not advantaged. Grit is your biggest superpower. You might not grow as fast from a single workout as the one IG kid who has 22-inch arms at 19, but you can find a strategy of training that exploits your strengths, and you can work it long enough to edge out most of your peers who are as or even more advantaged than you are. Josh Bryant explained the paradigm of the slow gainer like this. They're like the slow kids in class. They have to study twice as much to keep up. Now, if your first inclination is to say, yeah, but it's still easier for them, then you're dead to me. I have no patience, charity, or desire to convert people who fundamentally believe that they shouldn't be excited to make their way in the world unless it's guaranteed that outcomes will be the same without any obligation of spending more effort than the guy next to them. It should be just glorious news that you can bridge the gap between the people born a step ahead of you with just the most basic T95 capabilities that come pre-packaged in the brain of every lowly novice gym rat. There is no more user-friendly prescription than to say, just do this exact same thing over and over. It's like a rock that needs to be broken, and all you have to do is just keep smacking it until it does. A retarded monkey can wrap their head around that. So if you're tapping out because it's too hard in 2025, hate to break it to you, Chief, it would have been too hard any other era in history. So that's all you need to know about genetics. To summarize, yes, genetics are very important, but you don't know what that means or what to do with it, and actually nobody does. So if it doesn't give you any ability to actually get better, but it can potentially distract you, blackpill you, make you depressed and disillusioned and not want to lift anymore, then the question is, why the fuck would you ever spend a second thinking about it? For those of you that are willing to learn to bust your ass to dedicate yourself to a long grind, there is good news, and that is it is overwhelmingly likely that you could get a package that stands out amongst all of your peers, both the sedentary coworkers that'll know you as the buff guy and also the people that you train with and compete directly against. The question is, will you do it?